hung up again. All right, so trust me, a lot of us pros get hung up all the time, but there's a couple of different things that you can do to help your chances getting unhung a little bit easier, and that way you don't have to mess up this beautiful tree like this one right here. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to throw a crankbait in wood, but the problem is it's pretty dang snaggy, so I'm gonna tell you a couple different tips that have helped me over the years get unhung. I've been hung up so many different times, trust me, and the first thing you wanna do when you're hung up, what is it? Is to yank it. Don't do that, because you gotta think, okay, when you're cranking wood or cranking rock, when that bait gets wedged in a corner of a log or in some bark on the tree that's falling down, the hook's a lot of times barely in there. So when you set the hook into it, normally it's gonna be a little bit harder to get out if the barb's past it. But if you just got hung up, more than likely just a little bit, just a little bit of that hook is into that wood. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, it's very simple. A lot of people know, is take the line and try to whiplash it to get it to come out. There you go, I just popped it off right there. It just took a little bit. Now I'm hung up again, okay? So I just got out of that one limb, now I'm hung up again. Now the thing is, now if that doesn't work, then I'll give a little bit of line, and I'm gonna use the rod to sort of boomerang it back. There we go, right there. So those are my two fail safes normally. Like, I'll go back out there and I'll crank, get hung up like that. Key is you want your rod to load up, and then you're allowing that bait to freely come back up. Let it back up, and what it is the more buoyant, there it just came off. The more buoyant the bait is, I see people do this all the time. What they do is they just sort of point it out there and they just sort of slap it out there. You want to load that rod. You really want to load that rod where it really slingshots and pulls that bait off there. A lot of the crankbaits today, the more buoyant your crankbait is, the better this is going to work. So, right now I'm throwing a DT6. It does a really good job of getting off and getting around a piece of wood, but ultimately it gets hung up sometimes, and you have to know these little techniques. Now, let's see if we can't get hung up again. Of course, when you don't, I'm in the grass right there. Of course, when you want to get hung up, you can't. Put a tournament on the line, I'll be hung up every throw. It's just how it is. Gosh dog it. I'm literally casting the same tree, cannot get hung up. It's a bushy tree, it's got everything. Oh, come on. Literally, no joke, guys. I made a cast, and a fish came up and grabbed the bait. There's a little piece of wood right there. And one thing I will tell you, if you are throwing a crankbait and you're fishing around wood, the biggest reason why people do get hung up is because what happens is they reel it and they feel that pressure and they don't allow that crankbait to float back up. So a lot of times when I am cranking wood, I will throw that bait out there and I'll feel the pressure of the log way before I hit it. And then it's like, okay, I'll let it float up a little bit, kill it, float up, kill it. And it's sort of that slower retrieve that allows you for that bait to float up and not get hung up. So that is something that, it'll be a video for another day, but that is something that I definitely is a big ordeal when you're throwing a crankbait around wood. All right, so this is one thing that I see a lot of anglers do. So you're on a bank like this, you cast your bait out there, and you get it, oh man. So you get it over this branch. I've casted over plenty of branches in my day, but the thing is, people would just go to jerking and swinging, and all of a sudden you're hung up in the tree. Don't do that. Calm down, take a deep breath. I know it happens to all of us. Reel him up a little bit. And that crankbait, you want to get it within a couple inches, a little bit of momentum, and then you just pop them out. Boom. See, the problem is, if you have too much line, a lot of times, you can see I'm completely over that branch is coming out. So now I gotta look. You gotta think of it, because otherwise you're gonna potentially lose your bait. And now the smart thing to do is, if you only got one that color and you're catching them on it, let's go get the son of a gun. That is the smart thing to do. But we tend to not always think the smartest way. So what I would recommend in this deal, I'm gonna still reel it up as far as I can see it, and then I'm just gonna pop it over and see just like that. Because I gotta look where I had that, I had it way up there. There was another branch on top of that. And so I gotta just basically, when I get it close to the bottom of the branch or bottom I can see it, I pop it over. You're yanking it over. I see so many people get hung up that way. Okay, so now we're hung up on a piece of wood or some rock. Now this happens all the time, okay? Now, when I'm fishing wood, when I'm fishing rock, anytime, you're gonna get hung up when you're throwing a crankbait, even a jerkbait. But what helps is, the more buoyant your bait is when you're slingshotting it, the better off you're gonna be. When you have more of a suspending jerk bait and you're hung up in a brush pile, not saying you can't get unhung or you're hung up on a piece of wood, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to get that bait, like slingshotting. But the big key is definitely putting a lot of pressure on your rod and allowing that rod to load up and get that bait off there, just like that. It took 3 or 4 times, but when I really put some pressure on it, now, let's see if we can get hung up on that exact thing again. We get a little bit lucky. So sometimes when you really are, you know, this first slingshot technique of getting your bait all unhung won't work. So my second approach is to put even more pressure on the bait and really get a lot of it lined up. So I'm still hung up and everyone's off on the other side. All right, so that bait right there, realistically, I'm probably gonna have to get it unhung. It's right there at the end of the log, so I'm probably gonna mess this one up. So I'll slide up in there. There is one other thing that you can do. You can do this, but you can mess up your guides this way. All right, if you can't get it off by like slingshotting it, sometimes, now this all depends on if you have backup rods or anything else. If you can't see the bait, sometimes this can help. But you can, depending on the rod you have, can actually end up messing up your tip. So be careful on this one. So all you gotta do is take the excess line and you're basically just going to run your rod down to the bait. And we'll just sort of slingshot it, bang. And there you go. That can be definitely it definitely can be a way to get your baits unhung, but you might go through a couple different replacement tips throughout the year, so remember that. Sometimes the only thing you can do, last trick I got for y'all, is get off the bank and get it yourself. Just like that. Some days it's your day, and look, we all get hung up. It's just how it is. Every professional angler out here gets hung up, whether you're a weekend angler, professional angler, you go once or twice a year. Hopefully these tips save you a little bit of money next time you're on the water. See you guys next time. Hey, boat's floating away! No! Brody! It was about 20 degrees cooler. They're like, you have a kid.